Good morning, stakeholders, and welcome to the Office of Procurement Regulations question and answer session on the contract reporting for the period 2023-24, Quarter 3. I am Rhonda Joy Lewis, Corporate Communications Officer, and we are pleased by your response to attend today's session. We have with us this morning Mr. Aleem Bashk, Head of ICT, who will deliver a brief presentation on the contract reporting requirements for Quarter 3. As well as in our midst, we have Ms. Klasian Ellis, Ms. Samantha Marchan, and Ms. Davika Singh, who will assist in facilitating the question and answer segment. Before we begin today's proceedings, please allow me to go through some helpful tips for a successful session. Please note that your mics will be muted. Your questions will be answered. Your questions during the session can be sent via the Q&A chat option on the Teams platform. These questions will be collated by our team and addressed in the question and answer segment after Mr. Bashk's presentation. Please keep your contributions helpful and be considerate to our presenter and other participants. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email as well as uploaded to our website. So without further delay, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to bring and welcome Mr. Bashk, who will share his presentation. Mr. Bashk, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ms. Rhonda Joy Lewis. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time today to attend this session. So today, this morning, I would like to run through with you the requirements as outlined for the contract reporting for Quarter 3 for the current fiscal year. So the templates were issued last week along with 2 checklists. So for today's proceedings, I'm just going to go through some of these templates, show an example of completing the micro-procurement template, and thereafter, we will open the floor for any questions which you may have. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen, and if you can indicate if you're able to see my screen once I have it on. If someone from the audience can just indicate that they are seeing screen and hearing properly. All right, wonderful. So we got confirmation. All right, so the first template here, which I have on screen, this is relating to the contract report template for reporting over the $75,000, which is the not micro procurement. So this is the template that you're accustomed reporting on. The change that was made on this template is that we've added in a new column for emergency procurement, as you would see here in column M. All right, so if it is that the procurement that you're reporting on was due to an emergency, just indicate this as a yes. Otherwise, you will indicate that as a no. And this emergency procurement field was added on both the contracts awarded in quarter as well as in the PO in quarter field. PO in quarter, worksheet. All right, and this here again is in column M, emergency procurement. All right, so I'm just going to close off this template. So let's look now at the new template, which is introduced in this quarter, and this template relates to micro procurement. So here we have our instructions. So it's very important to review the instructions sheet on both workbooks. And just to remind you that micro procurement, that relates to any procurement of goods, services, or works for which the value of the procurement does not exceed $75,000, and this is inclusive of taxes, duties, and other charges. So there are 3 sheets for you to enter information, and then we also have here some sheets here for your guidance. So we have the key definitions, defining what micro procurement and what variation is. And then under the help sheet, we aim to define for each of the fields on different sheets. So for instance, in micro procurement sheet, for the different fields, to identify an explanation as what is required when you're entering your values. Under the micro procurement category sheet here, this is a listing of the categories which you can select when you're reporting your procurement activities. So here we have the micro-procurement category as well as the description. Now, for some of you, some of these micro-procurement categories may seem familiar. Majority of these categories were taken from the categories that are used in the national budget document, and there were some additional categories which we would have included for addition here. Some of these which were added were, for instance, car park fees and catering, as these are common categories which are used in the micro procurement area. So moving on to the micro procurement worksheet here. In this sheet, here you have to enter standard name of the public body, whether it's a goods, work, or service, the category of goods, works, or services, the procurement method used, number of times the procurement method was used, and the total value of award, and was an RFQ used. Now, I can just switch across here to a sample sheet to demonstrate what a completed sheet would look like for micro procurement. So taking the first line item here for micro procurement. So this is for the Office of Procurement Regulation. So this was a goods, and this grouping related to office, stationery, and supplies. So for this quarter, we had office stationery and supplies, but it was broken down into we used two procurement methods. One procurement method was utilizing selective tendering and limited bidding, and the other procurement method was using contracting, direct contracting. For the selective tendering and limited bidding, we use those 10 times. So 10 times office stationery and supplies was procured using selective tendering and limited bidding. The total value of those 10 procurement activities was accumulated as $250,000, right? And this is an indication, was an RFQ used for these? And we'll say yes. In the case where direct contracting was used, direct contracting was only used once. So we enter one here. And then the value of that was $10,000. If we look at another example, services was used, procurement for services for the category of hosting of conferences, seminars, and other functions. And we only used one procurement method, which was selective tendering and limited bidding. But we used this 3 times. So there were 3 instances where we had a procurement activity using selective tendering / limited bidding. When we add up those 3 procurement activities, the total value of award, inclusive of taxes, VAT, etc., was $90,000. So that could have been $20,000 was one procurement activity, $10,000 for another procurement activity, and then $60,000 for the third procurement activity. And again, we used an RFQ for those. Now we also had catering. So catering was conducted 7 times in this quarter. So we used one instance of direct contracting. And this is a new procurement method which was introduced in this quarter. And if you refer to the simplified regulations, it will outline the use of direct contracting. So this was used once, and the value of that procurement activity was $1,000. But in this case, we did not use, an RFQ was not used, but it was, as it was direct, we took the opportunity to utilize a verbal quotation, okay? If we look at the other instance of catering, there was a selective tendering, and there were 6 instances of that. And the total value of those 6 procurement activities, when we add it up, it came up to $7,500. All right, so if we look at it, and we did use RFQ. So the idea is you have to look at your procurement activities for the quarter, that for the individual activities that were under $75,000 and less. Break it up into your procurement methods, determine how many times that was used for that procurement method, for that category of goods, works, and service, summarize the total value of award. all right, and then indicate whether or not RFQ was used. So this is how you would fill out the micro procurement sheet. If we look at the micro procurement variation sheet, again, well, simple. You must insert the name of the public body. Here, you must make reference to the variation of the original contract or a purchase order. So do remember that a purchase order is a form of a contract, and this is mandatory. So in this example, the purchase order that was varied was PO 1238904. The original purchase order value was $50,000, right? So this PO was under 75,000. Now, if there was a variation of a PO that was, let's say, $100,000, that would not be entered on this sheet. Remember, micro procurement is relating, on this sheet, we're only capturing micro procurement variations for something that is like for $75,000 and less that was incurred previously, that was issued previously. So if there was something again, $100,000 value purchase order or anything over $75,000 with variation, you do not include it into the sheet, but into the other contract reporting sheet. So in this case, this PO was $50,000. The value of variation in this quarter was $10,000. So this PO was varied at 10,000. We go on to the next sheet, which is micro procurement payment. Simplest of them all. In this case, you just need to summarize the total payments that were made under the micro procurements. So if you look through, you may have had 100 payments relating to procurement activities of $75,000 and less. So a total that was paid under micro procurements was at $150,000. Okay, so those are the three sheets and how you can fill those out on the micro procurement payment. Now, we would have also shared with you a checklist, separate checklist for completing the micro procurement, as well as for procurements over $75,000. So it's very important that you do read those checklists before you complete your submission. So, and that will assist you in making sure that your submission is, well, basically free from errors. Now, we would have received contract reporting from public bodies for 4 quarters thus far. And for quarter 1 and quarter 2 of this fiscal year, we have been using these sheets, except for the micro procurement, which is a new sheet. And there have been patterns and trends which our team have been looking at, and some of those issues that were identified were included in the checklist so that you can be aware of. So just be cognizant of when you're completing your sheets that you look at what is mandatory. Again, so look for those red things, those red labels. Look at the date format, making sure the date format is included properly, and also being aware in terms of the values that you're putting into the cells. Again, the timeline or the deadline for reporting for both sheets, submission is Monday, 22nd of July at 4:30 p.m. And also take note that we have changed the submission or email address that you are submitting your contract reporting. So instead, previously it was support@opr.org.tt. It is now changed to contractreporting@opr.org.tt. So bear that in mind. I'll just repeat it again, contractreporting@opr.org.tt. We have received sometimes, contract reports being sent to different email addresses previously. So sometimes persons will respond to the marketing email address that the templates were sent, or they might send it to feedback, OPR. So there are different email addresses which the OPR utilizes. Now, the majority of persons would submit to the correct email address, but we do have some persons who are submitting to the incorrect email address, and that's a problem. Now, if you do submit it to the wrong email address and we don't receive it, you run the risk of being identified as being non-compliant in terms of your submission. Okay. Likewise, if you submit after 4:30 p.m., on deadline date, you will also run the risk of being flagged as being non-compliant in terms of your contract reporting. All right. So those are some of the things we just want to highlight. And now I would like to open the floor. I'll hand back over to Ms. Rhonda Joy Lewis, so for the Q&A session. So, Ms. Joy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bash. So we have started to receive your questions and we will address them as they arrive in the chat. So the first question is, the number of times that the procurement methods were used also indicates how many suppliers and contractors were engaged. Is this true?
All right, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us and being a part of this Q&A session this morning. It's a good question. When we look at what we are requiring public bodies to report, the number of times that we're recording, there's a number of procurement activities. So you could have multiple procurement activities being awarded to the same supplier. In that instance, let's just take, for example, if we assume OPR is a supplier, in that instance, OPR may have you may award OPR 5 procurement activity transactions, give them 5 POs, or you may have issued 5 contracts to the OPR. What we would expect to see in that micro procurement template is that you would record the count there would be 5 and not 1, because we would have had 5 contracts being issued, 5 purchase orders being issued, or a combination thereof. So it does not necessarily matter how many suppliers would have been provided, would have been awarded in that period. It's the number of activities that you would have conducted. So for each of those categories, we're actually asking public bodies to report us the number of procurement transactions that you would have had completed that resulted in the award of a contract or issuance of a purchase order.
Thank you very much for your response, Ms. Ellis. So we've received another question. What is the difference between direct contracting and single source procurement?
All right, so direct contracting and single source, it appears on the surface to be the same, but when you look at the regulations, there are some unique differences between the two. So if you go to section 25, 1, parts A and B, there are conditions under which you can utilize the direct contracting feature. And I just want to speak to them quickly. 25(1)(a) says, you're using direct contracting for micro procurement where the cost of engaging in any other method of procurement would outweigh the benefits of utilizing any other method of procurement, and I'm stressing on the and the proposed price to be paid is fair and reasonable, having regards to 1, the description of the goods, works, and or services to be acquired, the assessment of the value of goods, works, and services to be acquired, the geographical location of the place where the good, works, or service is to be provided, and other such factors as may be reasonable. Now, most of you would be familiar that with single source procurement, we may identify a specific provider who may have been, let's say, for example, a service provider that we've used in the past, and for continuity or some other reasonable factor, because there may be other providers or competitors within the market, we would have justified the use of going with that or awarding a contract again to that particular supplier. But under direct contracting, you have to weigh the benefits, and it must prove that going this route, technically going the single source route makes sense, or going the direct contracting route, it must outweigh, and the prices proposed must be fair and reasonable, so that it does take into consideration all of the other market factors, competition, and all of the other things that exist, which makes it uniquely different from single source, the single source method of solicitation.
Thank you very much for your response. Our next question. What is meant by publicly advertised and emergency procurement?
All right, so publicly advertised speaks to the fact that it's open tender, so that we would have gone out and we would have engaged all of the possible suppliers. And in this case, you would notice for the micro procurement side, we have a registry. On the everything over 75, so small scale, as well as over 1 million, we have the depository, right? So we engage all of the possible suppliers who would have been registered for those services. It's publicly advertised, or we are trying to obtain additional. All right. So where we're trying to obtain additional suppliers who may not have been previously registered within either the registry that's being held by the public bodies or by the held within the depository, right? So when we speak to publicly advertised tender, especially where we have the over 1 million, more than likely you would have engaged in some sort of open or competitive tendering that would require you, as part of the act, to actually publish the tender within the newspaper or within some trade magazine or wherever the market for your suppliers and contractors are. And then when we speak to emergency procurement, the act defines an emergency where we have exceptional or unforeseen circumstances where life, property, equipment, or business continuity is immediately at risk, or where the standards of public health, welfare, or safety needs to be reestablished without delay. So emergency procurement is where those factors come into play and you may have the need to now exercise procurement outside of the regular cycle of our procurement activities.
We hope that response helps. Thank you very much, Ms. Alice. Okay, so does this set of reporting templates replace all other templates that were issued prior?
Yes, that is correct.
Or sure. We are going to now address some questions that were previously submitted to the team. And we'll ask Ms. Marchand to address these questions.
Okay, hi, good morning. So we received about 4 questions prior to the session, and the first question was, the contract reporting sheet for contract activity includes a column for emergency procurement, regardless the value. However, the reporting sheet for micro procurement does not have this column. How are emergency procurement under 75,000 to be reported?
All right, so we do recognize that as Mr. Batch would have pointed out, we have a new column in what we would consider to be the template that you all are familiar with. So the contract reporting template that now identifies emergency procurement activities. And we are asking public bodies to indicate where each of your line items, because in this instance, where we have everything over 75,000 being reported to the OPR, every line item would have all of the details, and we're asking for each of those items whether or not the item, the actual procurement activity, would have been engaged as part of a emergency procurement. Within the micro procurement template, however, you would not see that column. With the micro procurement, you are not reporting on every transaction, you're reporting on aggregate, meaning you're going to be lumping or grouping transactions based on the procurement method used as well as the expense type. Because of this, firstly, you will not be able to effectively indicate to OPR which of those transactions are actual emergency transactions. Secondly, the details of those transactions would not be known to the OPR because of the fact that you are reporting, the act requires you to report on aggregate. Where OPR will see that details is where we conduct audits and where there may be investigations into your activities. So your procurement files, your record of procurement proceedings should retain the information with regards to whether or not the transaction was an emergency and follow whatever rules and regulations are set out in the Act and the supporting regulations for either type of procurement.
Okay, thanks, Classy. The second query for procurement of goods from foreign suppliers. The purchase orders issued do not have VAT, as this is paid upon clearance of goods from the port to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. How do we account for the VAT on the contract reporting sheet, given it is not on the purchase order?
All right. Now, while we do appreciate that there are these time delays between the original document that's being received, as well as the information that comes in from the other sources, in this case where we have items that's being cleared, and you get the VAT element and sometimes the duties, the freights, because we do have some additional charges. Especially for micro procurement, we speak to how we estimate the value of the procurement, right? So if you look at section, if you look at section 6 of the micro procurement, the simplified regulations, section 6 speaks to how we value, how we estimate the value. So while you may not know of the cost, what the cost is, you must have in your mind an estimated value of what the freight, especially we expect, let me put it like this, the OPR does expect that the activities that's happening at the micro procurement level are routine. You may have the one-off activities, but they are routine, standardized transactions where you should be able to effectively estimate what that value is. And so in you arriving at what you think your total cost is when you do your estimations, as you report to us, if that information is not available, and if you believe that the value that you're going to report is going to be significantly different because of the lack of information with regards to VAT, freight charges, and all of these other costs, you can indicate what your estimated value of procurement is. And when you send your response to us, you can let us know that some of your values would have included an estimate. And you can make the necessary update us with the information. But it shouldn't be very far off, because we do anticipate, again, that in many instances, the micro procurement would be for your low risk, low value items, which are routine. So the cost should be known.
Okay, where RFQ is used, what method should be selected from the drop-down list when all suppliers whom would have been pre-qualified at the time were used? The options available: open bidding or tendering, direct contracting, selective tendering or limited bidding, single source and sole source.
All right. Typically, when we think of how we typically use RFQs in Trinidad and Tobago, is that normally there's a minimum of 3 and there's no real cap on the maximum, but most entities do not utilize all of their suppliers or contractors when they issue RFQs. Normally, if they go that route, they would normally just go open bidding. If it is you used all of your suppliers or contractors from off the list, of course, you can select open bidding and then RFQ. However, once it is less than all of your registered or those persons who are within the depository, then it's going to be selective or limited bidding as your option in terms of the method of procurement.
Okay, and this is the last query before I hand you back to Rhonda. Procurement-related activities previously exempted under Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Act 2020, which is Act number 27 of 2020, Section 5B, such as legal fees, audit and medical expenses, are now categorized under fees and medical expenses. Please advise.
Right, so wherever there are exemptions, as would have been in the case of the Act, because these exemptions are not new. They would have existed where we would have had, before we even had the $1 million category, where we have the simplified regulations. So as you all would have done in the past, or at least we hope that you all would have done in the past, is where those exemptions apply, those items would not have been reported to the OPR because they are exempt from the rules of what is to be reported to the OPR, what is under the regulations. And we would expect the same to apply where we have micro. So even though there is that line item that applies to fees, etc., there may be fees that are reportable to the OPR and doesn't fit into those categories. Anything that is exempt, we don't expect that you would report those to the OPR.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Ellis. So we are continuing to see your questions coming in, and we thank you in advance for those questions. So we are continuing. The supplier information is not required for micro procurement, but required for purchases over $75,000 under the respective templates. Yet the purchase order information is required for both. Is there any reason for this?
Yes, the Act would have, where we would have had micro procurement, the procuring entity would have engaged in any micro procurement. The procuring entities, we are asking for less information. However, that due diligence is still required. So we still need to engage in vetting our vendors, doing all of the necessary due diligence activities as outlined under Section 29 of the Act to be able to identify, ensure that the suppliers that we do have within our registry are suppliers that would have been duly constituted from an Act perspective, meaning that they fall within or under what the Act requires of suppliers and contractors. In addition to which, the 75,000 bracket, so that's small scale and anything above 1 million. The Act does require that you provide all of the details, which includes, so for small scale under Section 30, it outlines that you should have, you providing all of the information with regards to your supplier and to the OPR. So you're actually giving us all of the details, whereas for the micro procurement, it is on aggregate. And that's the only reason why we're not seeing the specific details for your POs under the micro procurement. But you would have to provide it for anything that's over 75.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis.
Just to add to that, so for the micro procurement, where we request for the PO information is when you have a variation. That's the only instance of where the purchase order or contract information is added.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's a nice segue into our next question, which is kindly recap what constitutes a micro procurement variation.
So a micro procurement variation is the same type of variation that we would have had. It's just on your micro procurement activity. So wherever, and just for us to ensure that it's clear, when we speak to a variation, we speak to any changes in the actual original contract. So it could be a change in time, it could be a change in price, a change in quantity. Anything that changes what the original structure of your procurement activity that you reported to the OPR was, gets reported as a variation. So for your micro procurement, let's use an example. You may have had reported a catering activity that you would have put through. And for some strange reason, when you got the bill, let's say the caterers neglected to include a particular item that you would have called for at the last minute, and it would have changed the cost of what your total purchase order value would have been. When you are reporting, once that is identified, you would now report the difference. Let's say it was the $1,000 like we would have had before, and it now moves to $2,000. That extra $1,000 is going to be reported in the micro procurement variation. You will identify the purchase order. You will identify the original value of the purchase order, which would have been $1,000, and then the value of the variation will then be $1,000.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. We've seen Ms. Smart had her hands raised, and we'd now ask you, Ms. Smart, if you can unmute your mic. We will address your question. You can go ahead and unmute your mic.
Hi, good morning. Just confirming you all are hearing me clearly.
Yes,
Yeah.
Ms. Smart, we can hear you.
Okay. Was just requesting further clarification on the response to the estimating the cost of the VAT, the duties, when reporting our procurement, right? So just to give an example, when we issue foreign purchase orders, we would issue it on a cost and freight basis, right? So the value to the supplier, and that we be paying the supplier, would be on the purchase order. Now, when you ask that in reporting the information, we include the estimates of the VAT and the duty, I just have a concern that that may sort of misrepresent what we are paying to the supplier.
So there are differences. The assumption that we made with the question that came in, and probably it was a poor assumption, is in those instances where it's not the case where it's FOB shipping point versus FOB destination. So I made the assumption in responding it's FOB destination where we are taking or bearing the cost of freight, VAT, and all of the other elements. It will be part of our cost. Of course, if it's FOB shipping point and that cost does not reside with your entity, we would not expect it to be part of your total cost. So really what we're asking you all to do is account for what you pay. And if part of your payment does include the VAT, the freight, the duties, and those other elements, it should be part of the total cost that's being reported to the OPR.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis, and we hope that response assists you, Ms. Smart. Moving on with the questions in our chat, does micro procurement reporting include impressed expenditure as well?
Yeah.
It does. It does.
Would it be an issue if you report all transactions rather than the total for micro procurement? This is based on the accounting system. It may be burdensome to report in totals.
Right. So we would actually need it in the format that we've specified, summarized. So just a little tip there. So if you're able to have it in Excel, downloaded in the details, you could utilize the pivot table function within Excel, and it will summarize it by those categories for you, and you can just enter it there. So that would be our recommendation there.
Thank you, Mr. Bash. Our final question that we're seeing thus far, based on what you're seeing, small scale procurement is recorded on the contract reporting spreadsheet.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Marchand. Right, so we just welcome any final questions for our team here at the OPR. All right, we're seeing a question coming in. If the value of the variation now shifts your margin for micro procurement to over $75,000, is it now required that this be reported on the previous standard contract form, therefore no longer considered as a micro procurement?
No. So we actually was having a discussion about that prior to the session. So remember, on the micro procurement, the variation will be done on the initial contract. So if the initial contract is on the micro procurement, which would have been 75,000 and below, you will have to record that variation now. But what that tells us now is that if your variation amount is higher than your initial contract under the micro procurement, that will just raise some red flags for us in where we will say, well, there was probably improper planning or stuff like that. So no matter if it exceeds that 75,000, it will be reported in the micro procurement because your initial procurement would have fallen under the 75,000.
And because of this, we want to stress to public bodies that the planning part of your activities is critical. I'm going back to where we speak to the estimation. The estimation really does cater for all of those changes because now you have to make a distinction between whether something is truly going to be micro procurement or if it's going to fall above that, even though it's under the 1 million, it's going to now fall as part of small scale procurement. And making that distinction very early in your procurement process is critical If you anticipate, for example, that you didn't scope your purchases correctly, or there is the potential for a variation on your micro procurement activity that's going to take you above, then that is something that you should factor into your planning and probably should be reporting initially above that value if you anticipate that is where it is going. So we would impress on you all to go back to the regulations, pay attention to the details as to the estimation and how you should determine whether something is micro procurement or if it is small scale. It's very easy for the over 1 million because it's just by value over 1 million, but the same rule would apply just in terms of small scale to the over 1 million, just in case somebody had that.
Thank you for your response. Can you clarify how cash and credit card transactions are recorded where a purchase order or contract was not issued?
So
let's try to walk through that one then. All right, just to see in that case. So if it is such, there's no particular procurement method, that may sound like it's a form for direct contracting method. No, I'm just working that out through here. So what you will know your categories of services. So you will know whether it's a goods, works, or service. So let's say it would be related to a service. You will identify what your category of goods or services would be. And here on the procurement method. So your procurement method, you have to determine what was the method used, regardless of not necessarily how your payment method. So that's a payment method is what you're looking at there. So you refer now to see, you determine what that procurement method would have been, and you include that as part of the overall procurement methods used with that category of service. And that's how you report it. Now, as well, when you're reporting on your micro procurement payments, all of your payments, whether it was cash, check, wire transfer, all of that would be lumped and reported under this worksheet here, which is a micro procurement payment.
Thank you, Mr. Batch. So just for clarification, purchase orders 75,000 or under are not reported on the PO in the quarter report, only the total value in the micro reporting template.
Agreed. Agreed. And everything that is under 75,000, whether it's a contract or a PO, now appears in the micro procurement, where you report that to the OPR, is in the micro procurement sheet in aggregate. So really, your PO in quarter sheet should now only contain transactions, purchase orders, as well as the contract awarded in quarter sheet in the regular template. It should only include values for contracts awarded or purchase orders issued that is above the $75,000.
Thank you. How does one account or report for cash advances and a PO was issued to that employee's name? All right, so we'll just repeat the question. How does one account or report for cash advances and a PO that was issued to that employee's name?
All right. So again, we want to make the distinction between your payment method and how you pay versus what the actual activity is. So if we have cash advances to an employee, let's say the advances for an HR related matter, let's say salary. Salary is not part of our procurement process. So those items would not be reported to the OPR. But let's say in this instance, it's a reimbursement for a procurement activity that would have taken place. Then what we would expect is that the actual procurement activity gets reported and not necessarily the name of the employee. Let's use an example. Let's say we would have issued funds to an employee, or an employee was called and they indicated, here's what, we are out of water in the office, and so we just needed to go and pick up some water for us. The employee does that, brings the water to the office, brings in the bill, and then you reimburse that employee. Normally from your Impress system, you would probably record the employee's name and the amount of money that you would have refunded that employee. In this instance, when you're reporting to OPR, what we should be seeing is that the purchase was not necessarily a purchase that was made while it was made by the employee. It's not the employee that is your supplier. It would be wherever the actual procurement activity happened. So let's say they bought the water at PriceSmart, we should be seeing the item will come up as, let's say, direct contract, well, it wouldn't be direct contracted, but let's say single source or sole source, but single source, and we're going to be picking up water, beverages, or whatever the category is, and it will add to whatever that total aggregate value is under the micro procurement. The same would apply where we have reimbursements that are above 75,000 for employees. We would expect to see the provider of the service versus the employees.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Ellis. Will the OPR be publishing handbooks, guidelines on the simplified procurement, as well as templates for the registry?
Yes, so the OPR will be issuing general guidelines for simplified procurement. Currently, it's at the stage of, it's in draft stage, and public bodies will be notified once these guidelines have been finalized by the OPR.
Thank you, Ms. Singh. Please explain the way the information on the number of procurement is generated in each cell.
Okay, so let's take a demonstration of that again. All right, so I'm just going to bring up my screen. So here we are looking at the micro procurement sample sheets that we have created here. So in terms of, let's say, for instance, you would have had a procurement activity for catering. So in total, for the quarter, you had 7 procurement activities. All right. So you're going to break that down into 2 categories. One, into direct contracting, and the second category was selective tendering and limited bidding. Okay. So there was one instance when you used direct contracting. So let's say you would have procured the services of ABC contracting, catering. And then you had 6 instances where you may have purchased from Wingwa, Linda's, KFC, Mario's, Town Restaurant, and Doubles Vendor from down the road. All right, so those are 6 people. So when you add up those 6 persons, those 6 procurement activities, it came up, you spent a total of $7,500. All right, and then that one separate person that you did the direct contracting from. So hopefully, did that answer your question?
You can let us know in the chat if that question was answered to your satisfaction. We're seeing another question. Are we attempting here to capture all spend for goods, services, and works, except for exempt purchases? Because there are payments that do not go through procurement, such as utility bills, per diem for staff, travel, etc. This therefore crosses over into the finance department. Is that the intent?
It is. So the procurement cycle goes from end to end. And I know previously we would not have been, in most instances, most procurement functions would have ended where the contract is awarded. Under the new act, the procurement goes all the way through to final settlement. So understanding the payment end of it is also part of what is required under the act, and it's also part of what it has to be reported. So yes, there are those transactions that are payments. You are not required to report on the payment transactions, but you are, and the exempted purchases, but all the other transactions, we do expect that we would see them as part of your activities. Of course, pay attention to what is within the simplified as well as the act in terms of items that do not require reporting to the OPR. So those items that are exempt, because there are a few additional ones under the simplified guidelines.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. So we just give a moment just to allow for any final questions from our stakeholders on the live this morning. Right, we're seeing a question. Final payment includes to dispatching of checks or just up to the preparation of?
So we've had this question before on before we had simplified. And really what we've said to public bodies, if you create a check and the check is not issued, then you've not paid. So we've looked at it from the perspective of actual payment. When that check is dispatched and it has moved out of your hand into the hand of your supplier, contractor, when your ACH has been cleared, that type of thing. Once that money is now paid and really there's no recovery of it, we consider it a payment. That's where we're picking it up from.
Thank you. We're seeing some last questions coming in here. So to confirm, must all petty cash purchases as well as credit card purchases be included in the report?
Once those payments are tied to a procurement activity, yes.
All right. For Mr. Bashk, how do we identify purchase orders with multiple categories? Should these be disaggregated?
Well, in terms of the categories now are fairly broad. So chances are that, the purchase order should fall under that one category. If, however, though that you're procuring services from a supplier that has like various lines of businesses, but then you will have to disaggregate it. But I'm expecting that to be on a minimal amount.
Thank you. Donations and corporate sponsorships with or without a purchase order, are these to be reported as well?
So donations, again, and corporate sponsorships, they are not part of your procurement process. Those are payments that are being made based on decisions that are taken by your organization. And because they're not procuring activities that's happening, it does not get reported to the OPR.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Okay, so Ms. Alano is asking if the new templates for micro-reporting template have been issued. These would have been issued when we sent the invitation to this meeting. And if for whatever reason you may not have received it, yes, we will include in the chat here this morning. Yes, okay. Thank you, Ms. Singh. Is procurement therefore responsible to disperse the check to vendors?
No. So it's not that we're asking procurement to now get involved in the finance end of the activity. What we're saying is that procurement must have the data or acquire the data so that when they report to the OPR, they can report in its entirety. So that there must be some way to connect the activity that would have transpired and the payment in relation to that activity. So finance will continue to do what finance does. It may just require that there needs to be some type of reporting mechanism internally that would allow the finance department to say to the procurement department at the end of each quarter, these are the transactions that we paid on, and this is what you should be reporting or matching to be reported to the OPR.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Mr. Bash, one of our stakeholders is asking just a repeat of the answer. And the question was, how do we identify purchase orders with multiple categories? Should these be disaggregated? They just wanted to get the answer once again, please.
Well, yes, it should be disaggregated.
Okay. Material POs in the micro procurement range comprise multiple categories. I'm not sure if they're finished with their question.
I think it's probably tied to the same question that
okay.
Mr. Batch answered. And so, yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. And yes, Ms. Gonzalez, this recording will be shared with all the attendees here this morning. As well, we will upload it to our website and YouTube channels.
So I guess while we wait, just to the persons who would have come in late, and just to reiterate in terms of submission timelines. So submission timeline, it's July 22nd. All right, and these are on the instruction sheets for all templates. So Monday, 22nd July at 4:30 p.m. You are to send it to contract reporting at opr.org.tt. So just be careful with the email. Be careful not to put in contracts reporting or etc. We're no longer using the support at opr.org.tt, but rather this new email address for contract reporting at opr.org.tt. We would have shared 2 checklists, so important to check through those 2 checklists to make sure that you have completed as required before submitting. We really would not want to have errors that we have to check back and contact back to you. Again, it could run the risk of your submission being identified as being non-compliant. You'll be non-compliant as well if you would submit your reports after 4:30 p.m. or on the 22nd of July. So just bear that in mind.
Additionally, there is no need for public bodies to return the checklist to the OPR. You are only required to return the templates, the completed templates. Please name them with the naming conventions that we provided in the email. The checklists are for internal use. It's just to ensure that you would have crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, because we really don't want to identify public bodies as non-compliant unless we have to. So we are hopefully giving you all enough tools to ensure that you can comply and report accurately back to the OPR.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis. So Ms. Singh has dropped some important information in the chat there that you can review at your convenient time. And we just asked for the explanation of micro procurement variations for one last time, please.
No problem. All right, so micro procurement variation, like any other variation, we're just calling it micro procurement because it's for the under 75, but it's really variation. So when we think of a variation, especially in procurement, we're speaking to changes in price, quantity, scope. There are different elements that can be changed on your purchase order that could create or cause your awarded contract to differ from what it was originally intended to be. And that's what we expect that you would now report to the OPR. So wherever you've issued a purchase order and there is a change in the value, the quantity, or any other change that results in a dollar value variation, we expect that those changes will be identified in the micro procurement sheet. So, and all we're asking for is the name of the purchase order, so the purchase order number, and the value of the original purchase order, and then what the variation value is. So it's the value of the variation. So just using the example again, if we use that last line, purchase order 14533,
Yes.
the original contracted value would have been 1,000, and there would have been a change. So the total new value on the PO is now 2,000. So the difference being the value of the variation would be $1,000. Hopefully that explains.
So I will also add this sample, this template as well, so they can have a look at it and reproduce it.
And maybe we will add the example of the one that I explained.
Yeah.
We give a value of a variation over.
Oh, okay, sure. Let's put that in one time then.
Yeah.
So we will observe. Okay, so. Right, so in this case, that example again, Samantha, just remind me.
So it could be initial contract, we will put either it could be 75,000 or less, because that's one
Okay.
fall on the micro
Yes.
procurement. So let me put that 60,000.
Yes.
And then the value of the variation crossing 75,000.
Right, so it can be 100,000.
Yeah, 100,000 or least.
So I'm just going to include this template as well, the sample sheet for reference.
Okay, we are seeing some of your responses in the inability to open the attachments for some. Right. You can just give us some feedback, please, stakeholders, if you're unable to open all of the attachments or just maybe the Excel or PDF, and we'll try to resubmit in the chat for you. Okay, Ms. Will says she's unable to open all. Okay, we'll try to resubmit the same. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think we had two questions. All right. With reference to the foreign purchase orders, the only currency on the OPR micro procurement sheet is TT dollars. Are we converting the currency to TT dollars?
Yes, we are. All right, so wherever you have purchase orders that may have been in the foreign currency, you're moving those into your TT equivalent based on the foreign exchange rates that you're using at your organization, because that would be the equivalent TT value for your organization, and you're going to be reporting that value to the UPR.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Barnes.
I was just checking the chat to see. I'm seeing persons who joined the chat may need permission on the team. So we may have to see if maybe Rhonda, you may have to upload it.
Yes.
Yeah, let's see.
Yes, I can do that as well. When we're sending the notice of the recording, we will also provide these documents to everyone presented here this morning, just so that everyone has access to the documents. Our final question this morning comes from Ms. Singleton. She's asking, how does the report determine whether the variation is either the original value or under?
The report doesn't determine that. The report just gives us the information that when we go, when we come to your organizations and we conduct audits or investigations, that we are able to identify those that your organization has reported as varied contracts. Of course, we will then see if you did not report the varied contracts, because we'll be looking at all or many of them. So we do expect that you would report them, and we would be able to then validate that the original values provided are the actual original values of those contracts.
Thank you. Are overseas payments recorded also? And where micro for under 75,000 and on the original template for above 75,000?
Right, so yes, overseas payments are recorded on where we have the over 75,000 in that contract reporting template sheet. We have asked you to identify what the original currency of the contract or purchase order is. And so there is a listing in that particular template where you get to select which currency the original contract value is, as well as provide us with the TT dollar equivalent. In the micro, we are only asking you to provide us with the TT dollar equivalent. So yes, the foreign payments, we expect to see them once they are related to your procurement activity.
All right. So at this time, I would like to thank all our stakeholders for attending this morning's session, and just as well publicly thank the OPR team for providing their feedback to your questions. As mentioned, we thank you for joining us today. And as Mr. Bash mentioned, you can email your reports to contractreporting@opr.org.tt. And the deadline is July 22nd at 4:30 p.m. As mentioned in the chat, we will send the attachments as well as a recording of this morning's session to all who attended today. So on behalf of the team, we wish to tell you thank you so much for joining us today and have a wonderful day.